In the year of our Lord 1562, hunger was a language every peasant knew by heart. The soil had turned mean that winter, too cold, too tired to yield its mercy. And in a small hamlet beyond the reach of noble eyes, a woman stood at the edge of her cottage, clutching her newborn, her breath misting in the bitter dawn. Her name was Marjorie Holt, though few remembered it. To the gentry, she was just another wet nurse waiting to be found. But before that title, she was a mother, poor, desperate, and terrified of what love costs when food runs thin. Her husband, a laborer on the Lord's estate, had been taken by fever the year before. Now she lived on bread crusts and boiled nettles, her milk the only abundance left in her body. Each morning she prayed the same prayer, not for riches, but that her child would wake again and her milk would not dry. The village women whispered of opportunities in the manor house. Noble families, it was said, sought women with strong milk, women like her. They would take their babes and nurse them for coin, for food, for safety. But the price was unspoken. To feed another woman's child, she must leave her own. Marjorie's heart recoiled at the thought. Her son's tiny hand, barely larger than a sparrow's claw, grasped her finger as if to say, "Stay." But poverty is a cruel midwife. It delivers decisions no mother should bear. For weeks she resisted. She begged in markets, mended torn shirts, traded her hair for candles. Yet every dawn her child's cries grew weaker, his eyes duller. And so, one morning, when the frost had claimed even the puddles in the lane, she wrapped him in an old blanket and walked to the churchyard where a midwife's cousin was waiting, a messenger of the rich. "The lady of the manor," the woman said, "has borne her child too soon. She cannot nurse. She is pale as linen and frightened for the babe. They'll pay you well, enough to eat, enough to live." Marjorie said nothing at first. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "And what of my own?" The woman looked away. "You'll have to send him to your sister or your kin if you've any left. They'll manage. If you stay here, you both perish." There it was, the bargain of survival, to give life to another's child while her own drifted further from her arms. That night she wept quietly, her tears mixing with the chill breath of the thatch above. Her son whimpered, hungry again, though her breasts were still full. She nursed him as though it were the last time, because deep down she knew it was. By the week's end, she was summoned to the manor. A carriage came, its wheels cutting through mud like a knife through flesh.
The driver did not look at her, nor at the child she left in her neighbor's care. She carried only a small bundle, a kerchief, a wooden cross, and a heart hollowed out by necessity. As the manor's gates creaked open, the world changed. Stone walls rose high as heaven. Tapestries swallowed the cold, and the smell, my God, the smell of roasted meat filled her nostrils like sin. Marjorie had never been among such plenty, and it made her uneasy.
The steward, a stern man with a feathered cap, eyed her like one might a cow at market. "You are healthy?" "Aye." "And your milk is full as God allows?" He nodded, half satisfied. "Then you'll do. The mistress is weak, and the babe must not want." In that moment, Marjorie's old life, the frost, the hunger, the warmth of her son's breath, was swallowed whole by the stone belly of that house. She had crossed a threshold not just of class, but of the soul. Her milk would no longer be her child's right. It was now a commodity, a service, a form of servitude wrapped in silk and coin. And as she was led down the candlelit corridor to meet the infant heir she would nurse, she whispered a prayer not for herself, but for the child she had left behind, that he might dream of her warmth and forgive the emptiness her absence would bring. For in the 16th century, love and hunger were often the same thing. Both needed to survive, both capable of breaking the heart.
The manor loomed like a monument to another world, its windows glinting with gold and promise, its walls older than her memory of warmth. Inside, Marjorie Holt was no longer a woman, nor even a mother. She was an arrangement, a body with purpose, a vessel hired for her milk. The steward's quill scratched across parchment as though sealing her fate. "You'll nurse the child every 3 hours," he said, without lifting his eyes. "You'll sleep in the servants' quarters, take meals in the lower hall. No wandering, no visitors. You'll be paid monthly, 4 shillings. Marjorie's fingers twisted the hem of her apron. 4 shillings. Enough to feed her kin for weeks. Enough to keep her son alive, if the neighbor kept her word. She nodded, though her voice trembled when she said, "Aye, I'll do as the lady commands." The steward dipped his quill once more. "The mistress is weak and cannot nurse. You are not to distress her with talk of your own affairs. Your duty, woman, is to the infant heir." He looked her over one last time, his gaze professional but cold, the way a merchant inspects a cow before the sale. "You'll begin at once." Marjorie curtsied, as she had seen the noblewomen's servants do, though it felt foreign, her back not used to bowing to anyone but grief. In the nursery above, the air was thick with lavender and linen. The baby lay in a carved cradle, wrapped in silk finer than anything she had ever touched. His skin was pale as milk, his lips small and trembling. Beside him sat the mistress, a young woman no more than 20, her gown heavy with embroidery, her face ghostly pale. She barely looked up when Marjorie entered. "You're the wet nurse," she said softly. "Aye, my lady." "You feeds poorly. You must be gentle." Her voice broke on the last word. The lady's hands, thin and jeweled, trembled as she touched her child's blanket. Marjorie curtsied again and knelt beside the cradle. For a moment she hesitated, her heart thundering, her body remembering another mouth, another rhythm. Then she lifted the noble child with practiced care, holding him to her breast. The baby latched instantly, hungry but fragile, his small hand pressing against her chest. The room fell silent, save for the sound of his soft breathing. Across the nursery, the young mistress turned her face away and wept quietly. Marjorie felt something break inside her, a soundless fracture between love and duty. Her milk, once meant for her own son, now sustained another woman's dream. And yet, in that moment, she could not hate the child. She could not hate the mother either. They were both victims of the same order, bound by hunger, shame, and the laws of men. Days turned to weeks. Marjorie's body adjusted, but her soul did not. Every cry that echoed through the nursery reminded her of the baby she had left behind, his small mouth, the smell of his hair after rain, the way his hand curled around her thumb. Sometimes at night, she whispered his name into the darkness, praying that the Lord carried her words on the wind to the village below. But the manor's walls were thick, and prayers did not travel far. One morning, while changing the infant's cloths, she heard the maids gossiping near the door. "The lady sleeps all day now," one said. "They say the nurse has stronger milk than her own mother ever did. A poor woman's curse turned to gold," the other laughed. Their laughter stung more than frost. Marjorie turned away, holding the child tighter, hiding her face in the folds of her shawl. She thought of her own son, whether he had grown thinner, whether the neighbor remembered to warm his milk. The shame she carried was heavy, but heavier still was the truth that she had become needed by others, not for her name nor her kindness, but for the life that flowed through her. Her body had become her bread. On the 10th week, a letter arrived from the village. The steward brought it with little ceremony, tucking it beneath her basin. Marjorie opened it with trembling hands. It was not written by her neighbor, but by the parish priest. It read, "The child is with God now. He passed in his sleep and was buried near the churchyard wall." Her knees buckled. The letter fell into the basin, the ink bleeding into the water like spilled blood. No one saw her weep that night. She worked through her tears, nursing the noble child who slept safe and fed in her arms, even as her own lay cold in the ground. In the days that followed, something in Marjorie hardened. She moved like a shadow through the halls, her eyes hollow, but her movements precise. The other servants avoided her, some out of pity, some out of fear. Only the mistress noticed the quiet fire behind her eyes. "You are pale," she said one morning. "Do you miss your home?" Marjorie hesitated. "I do, my lady, but the Lord gives what he will." The mistress nodded, her gaze far away. "Then he must take much from us both." They said no more, but in that silence, the two women, one rich, one poor, understood each other for the first time. They were both prisoners of their bodies, bound by a world that measured worth by the milk of women. The days inside the manor unfolded like a clock wound too tightly. Every hour had its ritual, every breath its silence. Marjorie soon learned that the rhythm of her life no longer belonged to her. It was measured instead by the soft cries of another woman's child. The noble mistress, Lady Ellen, drifted through her rooms like a ghost stitched in silk. Her face was pale as the moon, her eyes ringed with shadows from sleepless nights. She would watch Marjorie nurse the infant, her gaze fixed yet distant, as though caught between love and jealousy. Marjorie never spoke unless spoken to. She kept her head bowed, her movements soft, her words wrapped in humility. Yet in the privacy of the nursery, her heart dared to beat its own rhythm, a steady ache for the son she left behind in the village below. Each feeding blurred the boundaries of love and labor. The child, with its delicate hands and noble scent, knew nothing of the bargain that bound them together. To the infant, Marjorie's heartbeat was comfort, not servitude. But to Marjorie, every moment of warmth was borrowed. Every sigh, every soft breath against her skin was a reminder that her own child cried elsewhere, hungry for the mother he no longer had. The servants whispered about her in corners. The milk-woman, they called her, the peasant whose body served the house. Some laughed behind their hands, others looked away with pity. But Marjorie endured. Her dignity was the only thing she owned. There were moments, though, when Lady Ellen would linger a little too long, her hand brushing the cradle's edge, her voice breaking into a fragile whisper. "Does he feed well?" Marjorie would nod, eyes lowered. "He does, my lady." "Good," Ellen would say softly. "You're doing what I cannot." And in that single confession, something shifted between them, a silence that no wealth could fill. Nights were the hardest. When the manor slept and the fire sank to embers, Marjorie would hum lullabies from her village, soft songs her mother once sang. Sometimes she imagined her own child hearing them through the wind, far across the fields. Sometimes she believed he did. In those quiet hours, she stopped being a servant. She became what she had always been, a mother, giving life in the only way she could. And though the walls around her were carved in wealth and shadow, her heart still beat with something older and purer than class or coin, the rhythm of sacrifice. The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the manor became Marjorie's heartbeat. Each morning began with duty, each night ended in quiet ache. The infant she nursed had grown familiar to her arms, his soft breath resting against her skin like a secret. Yet love, once given, cannot be measured or restrained. Marjorie found herself humming songs meant for her own child, forgetting for a moment which cradle belonged to her heart. And when she realized what she'd done, shame washed over her like cold rain. In the silence of the nursery, she often whispered to the child, "Forgive me, little one, I'm only borrowing your warmth." But even as guilt consumed her, so did tenderness. The noble infant looked upon her not as a servant, but as something holy, a figure of comfort, unspoken and pure. Sometimes she imagined her own son growing in her absence, his hunger soothed by another's kindness, his tears dried by a stranger's hands. The thought tore her in two. She loved two children now, one born of her body, the other born of her survival. And though her hands were steady, her heart was divided. There were nights when she dreamed she stood between two cradles, one gilded in silver, one made of pine, and each child reached for her, crying softly in the dark. No matter which she lifted, the other faded into mist. By dawn she would wake to the same truth. A mother's love is boundless, but the world is not kind enough to let it stay whole.
The years had worn her gently, like waves smoothing a stone. Her hands, once strong from labor and love, now trembled as they folded the worn shawl across her chest. The noble child she once nursed was grown, distant, a ghost of a duty long fulfilled. Her own child, once left behind in hunger, had never returned. She sat by the narrow window of her small cottage, where the wind whispered through the cracks and carried the laughter of others' children. Her eyes drifted to the hills beyond, gilded by the dying sun. A faint smile trembled on her lips, not of joy, but of release. In her silence, she carried the weight of every heartbeat she had ever fed. And when the last light faded from her eyes, it was as if the world exhaled, grateful perhaps for the quiet mercy of her passing.